Well, it is December 18th, 2024. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 5 types of tapping I think everybody should know. Welcome to Wednesday with Gene, presented by the Tapping Mastery Academy. I am the the eponymous Gene Monterastelli. Welcome, wherever you are in the world. Before we jump in, like I said, we're going to spend some time today talking about the 5 types of tapping I think everybody should know, and why that is useful as we step into it. As always, before we begin, what we like to do is we just spend a few minutes just doing a little wordless tapping, getting ourselves grounded. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take 90 seconds and just do a little tapping. All I'm gonna encourage you to do is just move from tapping point to tapping point in the order that makes the most sense for you. Take a nice big deep breath. And as you do this, just notice we're not doing anything diagnostic. We're not saying any phrases. We're just present. And again, as people just join and jump on the line, we're just spending a little time doing some wordless tapping to just be grounded and present. Oh, nice big stretch. And if anything came bubbling up, an insight or something you want to track, make sure you write that down. One of the things I think is super, super important, and we'll talk about this more later, is to track ourselves as we work our way through it. So, like I said, today we're going to spend some time talking about different types of tapping. Before we do that, actually, I want to just send a couple of thank yous. First of all, I want to send a thank you to Jill. Jill sent me this really awesome Hay House daily tapping thing. That actually has little affirmations to tap on every single day. That's not what it's designed for. That's what I'm going to use. The other thing is Madeline sent me this really, really awesome inspired knot of inspiration Christmas ornament. So thanks for folks who've been sending me stuff. I really appreciate it. It's not necessary, but I super, super appreciate it. So today, what I want to do is I want to talk about the 5 types of tapping that I think everybody should know. And just to give you a little context for this. So one of the things that has changed for me over the course of time as I've thought about tapping and I've thought about engaging with tapping is I've come to the realization that tapping is a tool and tapping is not an approach. And I think this is a really it might sound like a difference without a distinction, but for me, this is a super, super critical difference. The difference between a tool and an approach. And so this is what I mean. Let's take as an example. So for me, a cutting edge is a tool. Now we can use that particular tool in lots of different ways. I can use the cutting edge as a tool to slice a piece of bread, to spread butter on my bagel, to whittle a piece of wood into a pipe, to do surgery and to remove an appendix, to open a box. Now, in every single one of those settings, the tool is exactly the same or basically the same. It is a sharp edge that is used to perforate something. But when we are perforating something, there's lots of different ways that looks. There's lots of different levels of precision that needs to be there as we are engaging with that. And just because a cutting edge can be used to remove an appendix doesn't mean I should be using it. And so, where I think this intersects with tapping is oftentimes when something is going on and you know someone in your life and they have an issue and you know they tap, you might ask, did you tap on that? Which in some ways is kind of like saying, did you cut on that? Because there's lots of different ways that we can use tapping. And so for me, when I am thinking about tapping, and that's the reason why I say the 5 types of tapping that you should know, what I'm talking about is 5 different distinct approaches to tapping. Because there is a difference between tapping to clear substance sensitivity, tapping to feel calm in the moment, tapping to clear a complex trauma. And all of those types of tapping look and feel different, even though I am tuning into an issue and I am stimulating those tapping points. And so that's the reason why, for me, I think it's so critical and it's so important that we have clarity and understanding about what we are doing. And so for me, whenever I do a round of tapping, there's a couple of questions I always ask myself before I begin. And one of those questions we're going to talk about today. And that question is, what am I trying to achieve from this round of tapping? Now, when I sit down to work on an issue over time, what I'm trying to achieve might change as I'm doing it. In the beginning, I'm just like trying to find my way to ground and have a little clarity. And then as I get some clarity, then all of a sudden I realize there's a limiting belief that is in the way. And as I'm working on that limiting belief that's in the way, I find my way to a memory that needs to be cleared from something that is traumatic that happened in my past. And so we might have multiple things that we're doing, but at the beginning of the session and multiple times my way when I sit down to tap, I'm going to ask myself the question, what am I trying to achieve? What is the goal that I'm trying to achieve right now? And this does a couple of things. First, it helps us to understand how we are going to apply the tool that is tapping. Because depending on how I'm going to apply it, it's going to determine what I say if I say something and that sort of thing. But the second thing it's going to do is it's also going to help me to be able to evaluate, has this round of tapping been successful? Now, when we have a SUDS level is a subjective unit of distress, like 0 to 10, how big is the pain? And you give it an evaluation. Well, implied inside of that is, what's the goal of this round of tapping? It's to get that level of pain to go down. And so, even though I didn't say it, I have a goal and I now have a measuring stick. Now, sometimes I'm not going to use a SUDS level. Sometimes I'm in a circumstance where I am distracted. And so as I'm tapping, I'm like, the goal of this tapping is so I'm not distracted and I can work on what's in front of me. So after I do a few rounds of tapping, whatever approach I use, I now ask myself the question, am I clear-headed enough to work on the task that's in front of me or not? And if I'm clear-headed enough to work on the task that's in front of me, then I work on the task that's in front of me, and the round of tapping has been successful. And it doesn't even matter if I still feel a little distracted or I feel a little ungrounded, because the goal is not to be undistracted. The goal is not to be fully grounded. The goal is to not be distracted and to be grounded enough for me to work on the task that is in front of me. Now, sometimes, depending on the task, I need to be completely clear of distraction. And sometimes I just need to reduce the distraction enough so I can actually engage with what is in front of me in that particular moment. And so, again, you can see by just asking the question, which is question number one always for me, what am I trying to achieve from this round of tapping? And so when we ask ourselves that question, it now helps to give us the framework to figure out what is the approach of tapping that we're going to use. Now, like I said, I think there are 5 basic types of tapping that everybody should know. And so at a very high level, let's talk about those 5. So number 1 is what we would call content-free tapping, or a content-free intervention. I've always just said tapping without words, but When we say content free intervention, what that means is we are putting ourselves into a position where we're just going to tap and we're not going to say anything. Every single time we start one of these live streams, we take 90 seconds, we do a little content free tapping. As I am working through my day, like when I'm working on a task, every 15 minutes, my alarm goes off and I just do 1 minute of tapping where I'm not tuning into anything. And the reason why this becomes so valuable is simply stimulating these points downregulates the emotion system. Simply tapping on these points, our system clears cortisol and the other biochemicals that are associated with the negative emotions that we're feeling in the moment. And so, if my goal is to just be more grounded and be more present, then the approach I can use is something that is content free. And there's lots and lots and lots of ways that we can use content free tapping. We can use it to start our day, to end our day, to clear our head, to be creative, to be grounded in the moment. Um, our friends at the Peaceful Heart Network, they do amazing complex trauma work with some of the most traumatized people in the world, refugees and migrants and prisoners. And their entire approach is a content-free intervention where they're not saying anything out loud. So, way number one that we can tap is just content-free intervention, tapping on our body. It's super, super useful. It's something that most people don't think about because when you are taught the basics of tapping, you're taught to say a setup phrase or to say reframes as we are working our way through it. When in doubt, the place that we start is with approach number one, which is a content free intervention. So, number two, for me, number two as an application is emotional first aid. And what we mean by emotional first aid is to clear whatever is going on in the moment so I can move forward in a more well resourced way. Now, you'll notice I didn't say a fully resourced way. I didn't say an emotionless way. I didn't say I'm emotionally free. Every single time I do a round of tapping, my goal is to feel a little bit better. So again, if we ask the question, what's the goal of this round of tapping? And it's happening in the middle of the day, like an hour and a half ago as I was getting ready for today and I was having all sorts of technical issues with one of my websites, the tapping that I did, the emotional first aid that I did was to clear the frustration that I was feeling. And so the way to do that is I go, what's the goal? What's the emotion I feel? What's the emotion I would like to feel instead? And so I just say, I just feel really frustrated. I feel really frustrated. My frustration's getting in the way. My frustration's trying to point out what is going on. And I give myself permission to hear that frustration, to be grounded, to be present to what is happening in this particular moment. And so what it does is I have a really specific goal. Almost always when I am doing that sort of emotional first aid, if something bigger comes up, I'm going to jot it down and work on it later. Because typically I am doing emotional first aid tapping so I can be fully present in this moment to do what is in front of me. I'm not setting aside 10, 15, 20 minutes in my day to go after something big. I am just trying to move forward. And for me, I have time set aside typically Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon and Saturday or Sunday afternoon where I spend a little time working on those bigger issues, where I'm tracking them and I'm keeping an eye on them to make sure that they're super, super effective in that particular way. And so, in the middle of the day, when I'm distressed, I do emotional first aid. And by naming that as an approach, because when I'm in the middle of my day, I don't want to interrupt the work that I'm doing consciously or subconsciously to work on something that's really, really big. So if I know I have in my tapping toolbox a way to tap to put myself back into my body in this particular moment, I am much more likely to reach for it. So knowing that emotional first aid is something that I have, then it makes it easier. And again, the goal is to be in my body. So number two, emotional first aid. Number three, this is tapping for physical issues. When we're done here, I will put in the description of this particular episode a link to a much longer conversation I had about tapping for physical issues. The reason why I want to call it out really specifically is I think This is the type of tapping that we remember to do the least. I would be willing to bet when you first learned tapping, if you went to some sort of workshop, they talked about tapping for emotional issues, they talked about tapping for physical issues. I know whenever I teach the basics of tapping, I do demonstrations with emotional stuff and I do demonstration with physical stuff. But because, as Gary Craig called it, emotional freedom technique, because the way we think about things in terms of complex trauma, we don't often think about just tapping for a physical issue. Or if we do tap for a physical issue, we do it in a way where we're like, well, what do I emotionally feel about this physical issue? Or what is the emotional underpinning that is causing this physical issue? And both of those are super useful and super valid ways for us to engage with tapping. But as we do that, we don't often just tap for something that is physical. They just go back to that very, very basic training. I have a pain in my knee. It's just like, I have this pain in my knee, this pain in my knee, this pain in my knee. For me, I like to do that and ask a whole bunch of questions. How much does it weigh? What type of pain is it? If I painted it a color, what color would I paint it? All of those are things that are helping me to tune in. Like I said, we'll give you a link down below after we're done in the comments down below so you can go into more depth because I recently recorded a podcast training on this. But remembering that tapping for a physical issue is something that is super, super valuable. And so when we name what's the goal of my tapping, the goal of my tapping is not to feel the pain in my knee, not to have the strain in my lower back, to have more flexibility and mobility. When I name that as a goal and I'm like, oh yeah, I can tap about the emotion about how I feel, I can tap about an underlying emotional issue, and I can just tap on the physical issue if that's what I want to do. Number four. Number four is what I call self-coaching. Now, self-coaching is a version of tapping where we are tapping on a limiting belief or a resistance to taking action, or we could even use self-coaching if we're tapping on a memory about what is going on in the past. So one of the things that I often do when I'm describing like the work that I do is I recognize that there are three types of value that I bring as a practitioner. The first is I have a lot of expertise. I've worked really, really hard to be good at finding core issues and reframing and all of the things that are involved in that. Number two, I have a huge amount of experience. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've done thousands and thousands of hours of client sessions. And from those, I've learned lots of things that make transformation significantly easier. The third thing that I provide, and sometimes this is the most valuable thing I provide, is I provide the fact that I am not in my client's head and I am not in their emotional experience. You know what it's like where you're having a conversation with someone and you just ask them a simple question and they say something like, oh, I say that to my friends or I say that to my clients all the time. Because we're notoriously bad eyewitnesses to our own experience, and it can be really, really hard for us to be in a situation where we can see what is going on inside of us. And so that's the reason why I love tapping that I call self-coaching. And self-coaching is nothing more than me pretending I am the client and I am the practitioner. So when I am the client, what I'm doing is I'm describing what is going on and how I feel. Right now, I'm really frustrated by the fact that the people in my life don't listen to me. And no matter what good ideas I have, and I just go through all of that sort of stuff. Then, after I've done a round of two of that tapping, what I do is I imagine myself as if a friend of mine just said all of those things to me. And what would I say to a friend of mine if they said all of those things to me? You know, what proof do you have that they're not listening to you? Why do you think they're not listening to you? And as I'm asking those questions, I am just tapping. Now, like many times when I'm giving advice to other people, as I give advice, as I give feedback, they have more emotions, they have more information. They push back on me for what I am saying and what I am thinking as I'm doing that particular thing. And so I just go back And so the self-coaching is nothing more than I share the details that I have and the emotions that I'm feeling. Then I pretend someone has said that to me and then I respond to it. And then I pretend I am the client again and I'm sharing what is going on. Then I pretend I'm the practitioner. And by bouncing back and forth in this particular way, it's amazing the number of reframes and the amount of insight that we have because for some reason, we are so good at giving insight and feedback to the people around us. And we are so much less good at doing that for ourselves. So, by just doing the simple mental exercise, and when I do this, I literally, in my mind's eye, imagine two chairs where I'm sitting in one chair as the practitioner and I'm sitting in one chair as the client. And I just see myself going back and forth from those two positions. And it makes it significantly easier for me to tap and for me to engage. And then version number 5 that I think everybody should know is a version of surrogate tapping. My favorite version of it is talk about, talk to, talk as if. And that is a process where the first part I talk about the relationship and what is going on between us. This is the struggle. This is how I feel. This is the struggle. This is how I feel. In part 2, I do talk to, where I imagine, I'm not doing this for real, but I imagine I can speak directly to someone's heart and to their mind. And everything I say and everything that we engage with, they are going to hear with the intention that I'm saying it. And that's important because there are people in your life who are not going to hear things with the intention that you are saying them. And this is an opportunity for you to allow them to engage in a deeper way around that particular thing, because then you're liberated to say what is going on. And then part 3 is talk as if. That's I'm going to walk a mile in their shoes. I'm going to describe from their point of view what I think subconsciously how they're responding to this. They're not listening to me because they feel scared that if they listen to me, it's going to undermine what they are doing. They're not listening to me because they're afraid if they listen to me, I'm not going to listen. Like you can pretend and you can project yourself into someone in that particular way. And so when we do that, we don't necessarily change someone else, but we change the way we show up to have a conversation with someone else. You know what it's like to see a conversation where someone says something and they start to escalate, and the person responds more emotionally and it escalates, and the person responds and it escalates, and the person responds and it escalates, and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. But if we're in a circumstance where the person responds emotionally and I don't escalate it, then we never get really, really high in the emotional escalation. So because I am showing up more grounded, I'm making sure the conversation is more constructive. And so the way I do that is I do a little tapping on talk about, talk to, talk as if as we navigate our way through it. So, quick review. When we step into all of this, the thing that we always want to do before we tap is to ask ourselves the question, what am I trying to achieve from this round of tapping? And again, that achievement can be super small. I just want to stop seeing red. I want to be able to take a deep breath. I want to be relaxed enough to be in the moment. Or it could be, I want to clear this limiting belief that is preventing me from growing my business, whatever that is, to whatever level that is. So we name that. Then if we have in mind these 5 versions of tapping, wordless tapping, emotional first aid, tapping for physical issues, self-coaching, and some version of surrogate relationship tapping, it's going to make it so much easier for us to engage in all of that. So for me, again, as I step into the new year, as a practitioner and as a teacher, the thing that I'm working really, really hard on is thinking about how can I equip myself, how can I equip my students, how can I equip my clients, not to know lots of things, but how to integrate tapping into that. And so that's the reason why in January, I'm doing this really, really cool training that I'm calling the Tapping Mastery Blueprint. And in the Tapping Mastery Blueprint, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a lot of the stuff that we just talked about right now, and over the course of 10 hours, we're going to do a deep dive into all 5 of those critical types of tapping that we need to know how to do. But in addition to that, we're going to be talking about the subconscious mind and how it impacts that, and the phrases that we can sprinkle into those 5 types of tapping that's going to help us to get more out of it. So that at the end of the training, you're going to be in a circumstance that in the moment, you're going to have a really simple process to approach tapping. I think one of the great blessings of tapping is all of the things that we can do with it. And one of the great curses or cons that come along with tapping is because we can use it in so many different ways with so many different approaches, it makes it really, really hard for us to engage with it in a way that is useful because we have so many options. And so, what I want to do is, I just want to create a training that makes it super, super simple for you to engage with it in that particular way. And the really cool part is for all of the 5 parts that we just talked about here, we have simple recipes. Printouts going to make it easier for you. I mentioned to you, there's a question I always ask. What am I trying to achieve with this? There are actually a couple other questions that I ask every single time I tap that are in that as well. If you would like to join us for that absolutely amazing tap training, if you go to tappingqa.com/TMB for Tapping Mastery Blueprint, tappingqa.com/TMB, you can see how you can access that training. The training normally costs almost $400. In January, you get an opportunity to access it for only $50. I'd love for you to join us as we do that. I'm actually teaching the training 3 different times at different times a day to allow people all over the world to join us. And if you do it, you're in a circumstance where you can also get a self-paced video version of all of that. I've been spending months and months working on this. I can't wait to share that with you. tappingqa.com/TMB. Now, what I'd like to do is I would like, and this is something that I like to do every single time I sit down to tap or think about this, is I like to name the insights that came up. Now, as you look over my shoulder, you can now see that there is a cute little ceramic jug. It has a little face on it. It was created by Eliza Skinner, who's an amazing stand-up comedian and writer on Etsy. She's under Boo Berry Jones. And basically, every single time I sit down to tap, I track my insights. Last week, when we did tapping for the holiday season, we came up with a bunch of insights. I wrote down a whole bunch of them. We tapped on them. All of those notes now live inside of our little friend over there. And so, over the course of the next number of months, as we do these live streams, we're going to gather insights. And in February, we're going to do something really, really cool with those insights. So, as you're just kind of processing through and thinking about what we just talked about, I would love it if you enter the chat box right now and just typed a comment. What was something that surprised you, or what was something that you learned from our conversation today? Or name something that you reinforced for yourself. And the reason why I think it's so valuable for us, and you can go ahead and I'll keep talking while you're typing in the chat box. One of the reasons why I think this is so important and so valuable that we think in this particular way and we name the insights is, if I name something, it is much more valuable to me. If I recognize something, I am much more likely to remember it. So the process of going, oh, the thing that I was reminded of today, or the insight that I gathered today makes it so much easier for us to remember it. Makes it so much easier for us to engage with it as we move forward in the future. So, if there's something inside of this that you learned, I would love to hear what that particular thing is, because oftentimes we're in a circumstance where when we share something, we're in a circumstance where we can learn from the other people in the community as well. I see someone's having trouble with the link. Let's see here. Let's see what's going on with that. Do do do. It does appear that the website is having struggles. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste another link in the chat box. For those of you who are joining us live, you can now see the chat in the chat box. If you click on that particular link there, it will take you to the right spot. I'm not exactly sure why that link is not working for us, but I gave you another link there, and we'll get that fixed here in the next moment or two so you can jump in and do that particular thing. Again, we will get that updated for you so you can see exactly what is going on there. Let's see here. Some of the insights that we got going on. Tapping without words is just as powerful as tapping with more words. Sometimes it's even more powerful. I've always been the advisor, but never thought about being my own coach. I love that as an insight. Ask what is the goal of this round of tapping. Absolutely. It makes such a huge difference when we name that particular thing as we step into that. Awesomeness. So let's see here. Let's take a look at some of the footnotes for what is going on. Again, if you go to tappingqa.com/TMB for the Tapping Mastery Blueprint, again, we have a link in the chat box right there that you can click on as well, but I will get that link fixed here in the next moment or two. Other resources that are super, super useful. If you go to learn2tap.com, got basic introduction. If you are new to tapping, the Tapping Q&A podcast, we have episode 643 going live here in the next 45 minutes. If you go to tappingpodcast.com, you'll find the entire archive. And I have created a new tapping tracker and a training video that is absolutely free. If you go to tappingtracker.com, you will get access to all of that. Awesomeness. So going forward, we're going to be here every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We're not going to be here next week on Christmas Day as I will be with my family. But on January 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern time, we're going to do a bunch of tapping to ring in the new year. Keep an eye on your inbox. I'll be sending you reminders before we head into that place. Go back, rewatch all of this. Let me know what you'd like us to cover as we're moving forward. Sometimes we're going to teach like this. Sometimes we're going to do tapping like we did last week. I'm going to be bringing in some of my favorite tapping friends. We're going to do interviews. We're going to do conversations. We're all do all sorts of good stuff. But the plan is for all of 2025 to be here most Wednesday mornings at 11 a.m., just sharing some free training and some free tapping with you all. Drop us a note at support@tappingqa.com if you got an idea, something you'd like us to cover. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, as you click on the screen right now, you will see a playlist of all the past episodes of the live stream. I look forward to talking with you and tapping with you again real soon. Bye-bye.